Long before monumental temples rose above the plains of Mesopotamia, two powerful rivers were already shaping the course of human history. The Tigris and the Euphrates flowed from the highlands of Anatolia toward the Persian Gulf, carrying enormous quantities of sediment across the landscape. Over thousands of years, these sediments accumulated to form a vast alluvial plain in what is now southern Iraq. By the 6th millennium BCE, this river-formed landscape had created fertile but unpredictable floodplains. Although the region lacked reliable rainfall, the rivers deposited nutrient-rich silt that could support agriculture when properly managed. These environmental conditions established the geographic foundation upon which the earliest urban societies would eventually develop. The region traditionally known as Mesopotamia occupies the land between the Tigris River and the Euphrates River, two major waterways originating in the mountains of eastern Anatolia. From these highlands, both rivers descend toward the plains of southern Iraq, eventually reaching the Persian Gulf. In antiquity, seasonal flooding transported vast amounts of sediment downstream. Over long periods of time, these deposits created an expansive alluvial plain characterized by deep layers of fertile soil. Geological studies indicate that much of this southern landscape formed gradually through river deposition during the Holocene epoch. As the rivers shifted course and deposited silt across the plains, new land became available for human settlement and cultivation. Despite the fertility of these soils, the southern Mesopotamian environment presented significant challenges for early communities. Rainfall across the region was minimal, often insufficient to sustain crops through natural precipitation alone. Climatic reconstructions suggest that annual rainfall in the southern plains remained well below the level required for reliable dry farming. In contrast, northern Mesopotamia received more consistent rainfall due to its proximity to upland regions. As a result, communities in the south increasingly depended on irrigation systems that diverted water from the major rivers. The necessity of irrigation would become one of the defining environmental conditions shaping the development of early Mesopotamian society. Archaeological evidence suggests that communities living along the southern rivers began experimenting with irrigation techniques during the 6th millennium BCE. Excavations at the ancient settlement of Eridu have revealed traces of canals and water management systems associated with the Ubaid culture, which flourished between approximately 5,500 and 4,000 BCE. Similar irrigation features have also been identified at Tel Weli, another early site located near the Euphrates. These systems consisted of shallow canals designed to redirect river water toward agricultural fields. By controlling the flow of water, early farmers were able to cultivate crops despite the arid climate of southern Mesopotamia. The principal crops cultivated in these irrigated fields included barley, wheat, and dates. Archaeobotanical studies conducted at several Ubaid period settlements have identified charred grain remains indicating the cultivation of domesticated cereals. Barley, in particular, proved well suited to the saline soils that gradually developed in irrigated fields. Date palms also became an important agricultural resource, providing both food and raw materials for construction and tools. The ability to grow crops in irrigated environments allowed settlements to produce reliable agricultural surpluses, supporting increasing population densities within the region. Seasonal flooding played a central role in shaping agricultural patterns along the rivers. Each year, melting snow from the Anatolian highlands caused water levels in the Tigris and Euphrates to rise. When the rivers overflowed their banks, they deposited nutrient-rich silt across nearby floodplains. This natural fertilization process replenished soil nutrients and supported crop cultivation. However, flooding could also be destructive. Uncontrolled floods occasionally damaged fields, settlements, and irrigation infrastructure. As a result, early communities gradually developed systems of levees and canals designed to regulate the movement of water across the landscape. Archaeologists have documented numerous examples of early canal systems associated with Ubaid period settlements. These canals were typically constructed by digging shallow channels that directed river water toward agricultural zones. Over time, irrigation networks expanded in complexity as communities increased the area of cultivated land. Maintaining these systems required coordinated labor, since canals needed regular clearing to prevent sediment buildup. Evidence from settlement layouts suggests that communities organized cooperative labor efforts to manage irrigation infrastructure. This requirement for collective water management encouraged the development of organized social structures within early Mesopotamian communities. The geography of southern Mesopotamia also influenced patterns of transportation and communication. Unlike mountainous or forested regions, the alluvial plains contained relatively few natural barriers. The rivers themselves served as major transportation routes connecting settlements across the region. Reed boats and wooden vessels were capable of carrying agricultural goods and manufactured products between communities. Archaeologists have discovered evidence of bitumen-coated boat fragments and related artifacts at several early sites, indicating the importance of river transport in regional exchange networks. River transport allowed settlements to interact economically despite significant distances between them. Surplus grain, pottery, and other goods could be shipped along the waterways with relative efficiency. This mobility helped establish early exchange networks linking settlements across southern Mesopotamia. Geological evidence also indicates that river channels frequently shifted course over time. As channels migrated across the plains, new areas of land became available for agriculture while others were abandoned due to flooding or salinization. These environmental shifts contributed to the dynamic settlement patterns observed in archaeological surveys. Another important environmental factor influencing settlement was the availability of natural resources. Southern Mesopotamia lacked several materials commonly used in construction and tool production. Stone suitable for building was scarce across the alluvial plain, and timber resources were limited due to the region's sparse vegetation. As a result, early communities relied heavily on mud brick as the primary construction material for houses and public structures. Mud bricks could be produced locally by mixing clay, water, and organic materials such as straw. When dried in the sun, these bricks formed durable building blocks suitable for walls and platforms. The scarcity of certain resources also encouraged trade with neighboring regions. Copper, stone, and hardwood timber were often imported from areas outside southern Mesopotamia. Archaeological discoveries indicate that communities in the region established exchange relationships with groups living in the Iranian Plateau and other neighboring territories. River transport facilitated these exchanges, allowing imported materials to move efficiently between settlements along the Tigris and Euphrates. Over time, the interaction between environment and human activity began reshaping the landscape itself. Irrigation canals altered natural water flow patterns, while expanding agricultural fields transformed floodplain ecosystems. As populations grew, settlements became increasingly permanent features of the landscape. Excavations at early sites reveal continuous occupation layers, demonstrating that communities remained in the same locations for centuries. This stability reflects the success of irrigation agriculture in sustaining local populations despite the challenges of the arid environment. Archaeological surveys conducted throughout southern Iraq have identified numerous early settlements dating to the Ubaid period. These sites vary in size from small villages to larger regional centers. Their distribution along river channels and irrigation networks suggests that access to water remained the primary factor influencing settlement placement. Communities established themselves in locations where irrigation systems could be maintained and agricultural land could be cultivated effectively. By the late 6th and early 5th millennia BCE, these environmental adaptations had begun creating stable agricultural communities across southern Mesopotamia. Irrigation systems supported increasing food production, while river transport facilitated communication between settlements. The landscape between the Tigris and Euphrates had therefore become a region capable of sustaining large populations through organized agricultural activity. As these agricultural systems continued to expand, permanent settlements gradually increased in size and complexity. Villages grew into regional centers where craft production, trade, and religious activity began to concentrate. These developments marked the early stages of a transformation that would eventually lead to the emergence of the first cities in human history. Long before monumental temples rose above the plains of Mesopotamia, two powerful rivers were already shaping the course of human history. The Tigris and the Euphrates flowed from the highlands of Anatolia toward the Persian Gulf, carrying enormous quantities of sediment across the landscape. Over thousands of years, these sediments accumulated to form a vast alluvial plain in what is now southern Iraq. By the 6th millennium BCE, this river-formed landscape had created fertile but unpredictable floodplains. Although the region lacked reliable rainfall, the rivers deposited nutrient-rich silt that could support agriculture when properly managed. These environmental conditions established the geographic foundation upon which the earliest urban societies would eventually develop. The region traditionally known as Mesopotamia occupies the land between the Tigris River and the Euphrates River, two major waterways originating in the mountains of eastern Anatolia. From these highlands, both rivers descend toward the plains of southern Iraq, eventually reaching the Persian Gulf. In antiquity, seasonal flooding transported vast amounts of sediment downstream. Over long periods of time, these deposits created an expansive alluvial plain characterized by deep layers of fertile soil. Geological studies indicate that much of this southern landscape formed gradually through river deposition during the Holocene epoch. As the rivers shifted course and deposited silt across the plains, new land became available for human settlement and cultivation. Despite the fertility of these soils, the southern Mesopotamian environment presented significant challenges for early communities. Rainfall across the region was minimal, often insufficient to sustain crops through natural precipitation alone. Climatic reconstructions suggest that annual rainfall in the southern plains remained well below the level required for reliable dry farming. In contrast, northern Mesopotamia received more consistent rainfall due to its proximity to upland regions. As a result, communities in the south increasingly depended on irrigation systems that diverted water from the major rivers. The necessity of irrigation would become one of the defining environmental conditions shaping the development of early Mesopotamian society. Archaeological evidence suggests that communities living along the southern rivers began experimenting with irrigation techniques during the 6th millennium BCE. Excavations at the ancient settlement of Eridu have revealed traces of canals and water management systems associated with the Ubaid culture, which flourished between approximately 5,500 and 4,000 BCE. Similar irrigation features have also been identified at Tel Weli, another early site located near the Euphrates. These systems consisted of shallow canals designed to redirect river water toward agricultural fields. By controlling the flow of water, early farmers were able to cultivate crops despite the arid climate of southern Mesopotamia. The principal crops cultivated in these irrigated fields included barley, wheat, and dates. Archaeobotanical studies conducted at several Ubaid period settlements have identified charred grain remains indicating the cultivation of domesticated cereals. Barley, in particular, proved well suited to the saline soils that gradually developed in irrigated fields. Date palms also became an important agricultural resource, providing both food and raw materials for construction and tools. The ability to grow crops in irrigated environments allowed settlements to produce reliable agricultural surpluses, supporting increasing population densities within the region. Seasonal flooding played a central role in shaping agricultural patterns along the rivers. Each year, melting snow from the Anatolian highlands caused water levels in the Tigris and Euphrates to rise. When the rivers overflowed their banks, they deposited nutrient-rich silt across nearby floodplains. This natural fertilization process replenished soil nutrients and supported crop cultivation. However, flooding could also be destructive. Uncontrolled floods occasionally damaged fields, settlements, and irrigation infrastructure. As a result, early communities gradually developed systems of levees and canals designed to regulate the movement of water across the landscape. Archaeologists have documented numerous examples of early canal systems associated with Ubaid period settlements. These canals were typically constructed by digging shallow channels that directed river water toward agricultural zones. Over time, irrigation networks expanded in complexity as communities increased the area of cultivated land. Maintaining these systems required coordinated labor, since canals needed regular clearing to prevent sediment buildup. Evidence from settlement layouts suggests that communities organized cooperative labor efforts to manage irrigation infrastructure. This requirement for collective water management encouraged the development of organized social structures within early Mesopotamian communities. The geography of southern Mesopotamia also influenced patterns of transportation and communication. Unlike mountainous or forested regions, the alluvial plains contained relatively few natural barriers. The rivers themselves served as major transportation routes connecting settlements across the region. Reed boats and wooden vessels were capable of carrying agricultural goods and manufactured products between communities. Archaeologists have discovered evidence of bitumen-coated boat fragments and related artifacts at several early sites, indicating the importance of river transport in regional exchange networks. River transport allowed settlements to interact economically despite significant distances between them. Surplus grain, pottery, and other goods could be shipped along the waterways with relative efficiency. This mobility helped establish early exchange networks linking settlements across southern Mesopotamia. Geological evidence also indicates that river channels frequently shifted course over time. As channels migrated across the plains, new areas of land became available for agriculture while others were abandoned due to flooding or salinization. These environmental shifts contributed to the dynamic settlement patterns observed in archaeological surveys. Another important environmental factor influencing settlement was the availability of natural resources. Southern Mesopotamia lacked several materials commonly used in construction and tool production. Stone suitable for building was scarce across the alluvial plain, and timber resources were limited due to the region's sparse vegetation. As a result, early communities relied heavily on mud brick as the primary construction material for houses and public structures. Mud bricks could be produced locally by mixing clay, water, and organic materials such as straw. When dried in the sun, these bricks formed durable building blocks suitable for walls and platforms. The scarcity of certain resources also encouraged trade with neighboring regions. Copper, stone, and hardwood timber were often imported from areas outside southern Mesopotamia. Archaeological discoveries indicate that communities in the region established exchange relationships with groups living in the Iranian Plateau and other neighboring territories. River transport facilitated these exchanges, allowing imported materials to move efficiently between settlements along the Tigris and Euphrates. Over time, the interaction between environment and human activity began reshaping the landscape itself. Irrigation canals altered natural water flow patterns, while expanding agricultural fields transformed floodplain ecosystems. As populations grew, settlements became increasingly permanent features of the landscape. Excavations at early sites reveal continuous occupation layers, demonstrating that communities remained in the same locations for centuries. This stability reflects the success of irrigation agriculture in sustaining local populations despite the challenges of the arid environment. Archaeological surveys conducted throughout southern Iraq have identified numerous early settlements dating to the Ubaid period. These sites vary in size from small villages to larger regional centers. Their distribution along river channels and irrigation networks suggests that access to water remained the primary factor influencing settlement placement. Communities established themselves in locations where irrigation systems could be maintained and agricultural land could be cultivated effectively. By the late 6th and early 5th millennia BCE, these environmental adaptations had begun creating stable agricultural communities across southern Mesopotamia. Irrigation systems supported increasing food production, while river transport facilitated communication between settlements. The landscape between the Tigris and Euphrates had therefore become a region capable of sustaining large populations through organized agricultural activity. As these agricultural systems continued to expand, permanent settlements gradually increased in size and complexity. Villages grew into regional centers where craft production, trade, and religious activity began to concentrate. These developments marked the early stages of a transformation that would eventually lead to the emergence of the first cities in human history. Before we continue deeper into the history, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a new Nightfall history documentary. If you're enjoying the journey so far, leave a comment and share which part of the story you find most fascinating. By the 5th millennium BCE, small farming villages across southern Mesopotamia were beginning to display the first signs of organized society. Along the riverbanks and irrigation channels of the alluvial plain, communities were gradually transforming the landscape through agriculture, construction, and cooperative labor. Archaeological evidence indicates that these settlements were no longer temporary camps or seasonal farming stations. Instead, they had become permanent villages supported by irrigation farming and shared social institutions. Over several centuries, these communities established patterns of settlement, production, and regional interaction that would later support the emergence of the first cities. The period known as the Ubaid culture, dated approximately between 5500 and 4000 BCE, represents one of the earliest phases of complex village life in southern Mesopotamia. The name derives from the archaeological site of Tel al-Ubaid, where distinctive pottery styles were first identified in the early 20th century. Subsequent excavations across southern Iraq revealed that similar pottery and settlement patterns appeared at numerous sites, suggesting the existence of a widespread cultural tradition. This archaeological horizon extended across large areas of the Mesopotamian lowlands and also influenced regions farther north. One of the most important early settlements associated with this period is Eridu, located near the southern edge of the Mesopotamian plain. Excavations conducted at Eridu uncovered multiple architectural layers representing centuries of continuous occupation. Among the most significant discoveries were the remains of early temple structures built on raised platforms. These buildings appear to have served communal or ritual functions within the settlement. Archaeologists have identified several phases of temple construction at the site, each built atop the remains of earlier structures. This sequence indicates that the community maintained a long-standing tradition of rebuilding and expanding the same central sacred space. The settlement pattern of Ubaid communities generally consisted of small villages situated near irrigation channels or river branches. Houses were constructed primarily from sun-dried mud bricks, reflecting the scarcity of stone and timber in the southern Mesopotamian environment. Typical residential structures followed a tripartite layout with a central hall and smaller side rooms. These buildings often included hearths, storage spaces, and work areas for food preparation or craft activities. Excavations at several sites have revealed clusters of houses arranged along narrow pathways or open communal spaces, suggesting a degree of planned organization within the village layout. Agriculture remained the economic foundation of these early settlements. Irrigation canals allowed farmers to cultivate crops despite the region's limited rainfall. Archaeobotanical studies conducted at multiple Ubaid period sites have identified barley as the dominant grain crop. Barley proved particularly well suited to irrigated fields, where soil salinity could gradually increase over time. In addition to cereal cultivation, date palms were likely grown in irrigated orchards, providing both food and building materials. Animal husbandry also contributed to the rural economy, with evidence indicating the domestication of sheep, goats, and cattle. Maintaining irrigation systems required coordinated labor from members of the community. Canals had to be regularly cleared of sediment, and levees required repair after seasonal flooding. The management of these water systems suggests that early villages developed mechanisms for organizing communal work. Although direct written evidence does not survive from this early period, settlement layouts and irrigation infrastructure imply some form of collective decision-making or leadership. Certain larger buildings discovered within settlements may have functioned as communal gathering spaces where agricultural planning and water distribution were coordinated. Pottery production represents one of the most distinctive cultural features of the Ubaid period. Archaeologists have uncovered large quantities of ceramic vessels decorated with painted geometric patterns. These vessels include bowls, jars, and storage containers used for food preparation, storage, and transport. The widespread distribution of similar pottery styles across multiple settlements indicates that artisans shared common manufacturing techniques and aesthetic traditions. Chemical analyses of clay sources also suggest that pottery was sometimes produced locally using regionally available materials. The presence of standardized pottery forms implies the emergence of craft specialization within Ubaid communities. While most households likely produced basic goods for daily use, certain individuals may have focused more extensively on ceramic production or other specialized crafts. Evidence for weaving tools, stone implements, and small copper artifacts has also been discovered at several sites. These findings suggest that craft activities were becoming increasingly integrated into village economies. Archaeological discoveries also indicate that Ubaid communities participated in early long-distance exchange networks. Obsidian tools found in southern Mesopotamian settlements have been traced through geological analysis to volcanic sources in eastern Anatolia. Similarly, marine shells discovered at inland settlements appear to have originated from the Persian Gulf coastline. Small quantities of copper artifacts suggest contact with metal-producing regions located in the Iranian plateau. These materials likely reached southern Mesopotamia through a series of exchange relationships connecting multiple communities across the Near East. The distribution of imported materials across various settlements indicates that exchange networks operated on a regional scale. River transport along the Euphrates River and Tigris River probably played a significant role in facilitating these interactions. Boats constructed from reeds and sealed with bitumen were capable of carrying goods between distant settlements along the river systems. The use of waterways for transportation allowed agricultural products, crafted goods, and imported materials to circulate across the Mesopotamian landscape. Social organization during the Ubaid period appears to have remained relatively egalitarian when compared to later urban societies. Most residential structures are similar in size and construction, suggesting limited economic inequality among households. However, subtle architectural differences indicate that certain individuals or families may have held greater social influence within the community. Larger houses or buildings located near central communal structures may have belonged to leaders responsible for organizing irrigation management, trade, or religious activities. Religious practices also played an important role in village life. The temple complex at Eridu provides some of the earliest evidence for organized ritual architecture in Mesopotamia. Archaeologists uncovered altars, offering tables, and ceremonial objects within these temple buildings. These features suggest that communal gatherings and religious ceremonies were conducted within the structure. The repeated reconstruction of the temple over several centuries indicates that religious traditions were maintained across generations. As the Ubaid period progressed, settlement patterns began to change gradually across southern Mesopotamia. Archaeological surveys reveal an increasing number of villages distributed across the region, indicating steady population growth. Some settlements expanded significantly in size, occupying larger areas and supporting more complex architectural arrangements. These larger villages often contained multiple communal buildings alongside residential districts. The growth of settlements was closely connected to improvements in agricultural productivity. Expanding irrigation networks allowed farmers to cultivate additional land, producing greater quantities of grain and other crops. Surplus agricultural production could support larger populations and allow some individuals to devote more time to specialized activities such as craft production or trade. Over time, these economic and demographic changes contributed to the gradual transformation of village communities into more complex social systems. Regional interaction also intensified during the later phases of the Ubaid period. Similar pottery styles and architectural traditions appeared across a wide geographic area, extending beyond southern Mesopotamia. Archaeologists have identified Ubaid cultural influences reaching into northern Mesopotamia, the Syrian plains, and parts of the Persian Gulf Coast. This distribution suggests that communities were increasingly connected through trade networks and shared cultural practices. By the late 5th millennium BCE, several settlements had grown considerably larger than typical farming villages. Their expanded populations, communal buildings, and organized irrigation systems indicate the emergence of proto-urban communities. These settlements began to concentrate economic activities, religious institutions, and administrative functions within a single location. Although they had not yet developed the full characteristics of later cities, they represented an important transitional stage in the development of Mesopotamian civilization. As population density increased and agricultural production continued expanding, the social and economic foundations of urban life were gradually taking shape across the southern Mesopotamian plain. In the centuries that followed, these developments would lead to the emergence of larger settlements whose scale and complexity marked the beginning of the world's first true cities. By the 4th millennium BCE, one settlement in southern Mesopotamia had begun to grow beyond anything previously seen in human history. What had once been scattered farming villages along the river plains were gradually consolidating into larger communities. Among them, the settlement later known as Uruk expanded rapidly, eventually covering more than 100 hectares. This growth signaled a major transformation in human settlement patterns. For the first time, populations numbering in the tens of thousands were living together within a single organized landscape. Archaeological evidence indicates that this expansion began during the early Uruk period. Excavations conducted throughout the 20th century uncovered layers of architecture that demonstrate a gradual but consistent increase in settlement size. Residential buildings multiplied, new public structures appeared, and organized street patterns began to develop. These structural changes suggest that communities were transitioning from loosely organized agricultural villages to densely populated proto-urban centers. One of the primary factors enabling this transformation was the growing efficiency of irrigation agriculture. The fertile alluvial soils of southern Mesopotamia supported high yields when properly managed. Archaeological surveys show that canals expanded significantly during this period, connecting fields directly to the river systems. These irrigation channels allowed farmers to control seasonal flooding and deliver water across greater distances. Records from later Mesopotamian periods indicate that crops such as barley became particularly important because of their ability to tolerate the saline soils common in irrigated fields. The expansion of agriculture supported significant population growth. As food surpluses increased, communities were able to sustain larger numbers of people who were not directly involved in farming. This development allowed new forms of specialized labor to appear within settlements. Archaeologists have uncovered workshops associated with pottery production, stone tool manufacturing, and textile processing. Large quantities of standardized ceramic vessels from the Uruk period suggest that pottery production had become increasingly organized and possibly regulated. Among the most distinctive artifacts of this era are beveled rim bowls, simple clay vessels found in enormous quantities across Mesopotamian sites. Their standardized shape and size indicate that they may have been used for distributing measured portions of grain or rations. Some scholars interpret these bowls as evidence of an early administrative system responsible for managing food supplies within growing communities. The widespread presence of such containers suggests that systems of centralized distribution may have already begun to operate in proto-urban environments. Architectural evidence further illustrates the increasing complexity of these settlements. Excavations within Uruk revealed monumental buildings constructed on raised platforms. Two major precincts have been identified, the Yana district and the Anu district. These areas contained large ceremonial buildings, courtyards, and storage facilities. Their scale indicates organized construction efforts requiring coordinated labor from substantial portions of the population. The presence of these complexes also implies the emergence of leadership groups responsible for directing public works. Large communal structures may have served multiple purposes within early urban communities. Some functioned as religious centers, while others likely operated as administrative hubs where agricultural goods were collected, stored, and redistributed. Clay seal impressions discovered in storage areas suggest that goods were tracked and controlled through early systems of record-keeping. These administrative practices demonstrate the beginnings of bureaucratic organization long before the widespread development of writing. Trade networks also expanded significantly during the Uruk period. Southern Mesopotamia lacked many natural resources, including timber, stone, and metal ores. As proto-urban settlements grew, demand for these materials increased. Archaeologists have identified imported goods at Mesopotamian sites that originated from distant regions. Obsidian tools found in the archaeological record likely came from volcanic sources in eastern Anatolia. Copper artifacts may have been imported from regions of the Iranian Plateau or Oman. Marine shells discovered at inland sites indicate connections with communities along the Persian Gulf. River transport played a critical role in facilitating these exchange networks. The Tigris River and the Euphrates River provided natural transportation corridors linking distant settlements. Boats constructed from reeds and bitumen could carry bulk goods efficiently along these waterways. Archaeological discoveries of docking areas and canal systems indicate that water transport was integrated into the economic life of expanding communities. As trade intensified, merchants and craft specialists likely became increasingly important members of urban society. The movement of goods between regions required negotiation, planning, and knowledge of distant markets. Although written records from this early stage remain limited, later administrative tablets describe complex trade operations involving standardized weights and sealed cargo containers. These later records suggest that the foundations of organized commerce were already developing during the proto-urban phase. Population density within large settlements also introduced new social challenges. Coordinating irrigation maintenance, food distribution, and construction projects required systems of authority capable of organizing collective labor. Archaeologists have identified differences in house sizes and building materials within some Uruk period settlements. Larger structures containing multiple rooms may have belonged to individuals or families holding higher social status. These architectural distinctions provide early evidence of emerging social hierarchy. Administrative control over resources likely contributed to the development of political leadership. The management of irrigation networks alone required careful scheduling and cooperation between farming communities. Canals had to be cleared of sediment, levees repaired after seasonal flooding, and water allocation regulated across agricultural fields. Without coordination, disputes over water access could threaten the stability of the entire system. Leadership structures therefore emerged partly as practical solutions to the challenges of managing shared environmental resources. Archaeological discoveries also reveal the growing role of religious institutions in proto-urban life. Temples constructed during the Uruk period were often among the largest buildings within settlements. These structures may have functioned not only as places of worship but also as centers of economic management. Storage facilities attached to temple complexes contained large quantities of grain and other agricultural products. Seal impressions and clay tokens found in these storage areas suggest organized accounting procedures. Clay tokens, small shaped objects used to represent quantities of goods, provide important evidence for early administrative practices. These tokens were sometimes enclosed within clay envelopes known as bulli, which were sealed with identifying marks. According to many historians, these systems of counting and recording eventually contributed to the development of writing. The earliest known writing tablets from Mesopotamia appear near the end of the Uruk period and are primarily administrative records listing commodities and labor allocations. The transformation from village networks to large settlements did not occur simultaneously across all regions of Mesopotamia. While southern cities such as Uruk expanded dramatically, northern regions experienced different patterns of development. Some northern communities remained smaller but participated in trade networks connecting them to southern urban centers. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Tel Brak indicates that urbanization processes may have occurred independently in multiple locations. Nevertheless, the growth of Uruk appears to have exerted considerable influence across the wider region. Archaeologists have discovered settlements in Syria and southeastern Anatolia containing material culture strongly associated with the Uruk civilization. These sites include distinctive pottery styles and architectural features similar to those found in southern Mesopotamia. Some scholars refer to this phenomenon as the Uruk expansion, suggesting that merchants, administrators, or colonists established outposts beyond the southern alluvial plain. This expansion demonstrates that proto-urban centers were not isolated communities but participants in a broader regional network. Economic connections linked distant settlements through the exchange of goods, technologies, and administrative practices. As these networks expanded, the influence of early urban institutions spread across much of the Near East. By the late 4th millennium BCE, the transformation of Mesopotamian society had become unmistakable. Settlements such as Uruk had reached unprecedented sizes, supported by advanced irrigation agriculture, specialized labor systems, and expanding trade networks. Monumental architecture, administrative technologies, and emerging social hierarchies all indicated that a new stage of human organization had begun. These developments created the institutional foundations necessary for the appearance of fully developed cities. Systems of governance, economic coordination, and religious authority were becoming increasingly formalized within the growing urban landscape. As populations continued to concentrate within these proto-urban centers, new forms of political leadership and administrative control would soon emerge to manage the complexities of city life. As these settlements expanded, the need for organized governance became more pronounced. Leadership structures capable of directing labor, managing resources, and maintaining order would soon evolve into the political institutions that defined the earliest city-states of Mesopotamia. Towering temple complexes soon dominated the skylines of early Mesopotamian cities. By the middle of the Uruk period, particularly between approximately 3700 and 3300 BCE, the scale and organization of construction projects in southern Mesopotamia had changed dramatically. Settlements that had recently grown into proto-urban centers now began to construct large public buildings that required coordinated planning, centralized authority, and the mobilization of extensive labor forces. The most prominent archaeological evidence for this transformation comes from excavations at Uruk, one of the largest settlements of the 4th millennium BCE. German archaeological teams working at the site during the 20th century uncovered two major ceremonial districts, known as the Yana Precinct and the Anu Precinct. These complexes contained multiple large buildings, courtyards, and platforms constructed from standardized mud bricks. Their layout demonstrates that public architecture had become a central feature of the urban landscape. The Yana district, in particular, represents one of the earliest examples of monumental architectural planning in human history. This precinct consisted of several large halls, temples, and administrative structures arranged around open courtyards. The buildings were constructed on elevated platforms, raising them above the surrounding residential areas. Such elevation served both practical and symbolic purposes. Elevated structures provided protection from flooding while simultaneously emphasizing the authority and importance of the institutions housed within them. Archaeological excavations reveal that these monumental buildings required enormous quantities of construction materials. Standardized mud bricks formed the primary building component, often reinforced with reed matting for stability. The production of these bricks alone demanded organized labor, as clay had to be collected, shaped into molds, dried, and transported to construction sites. The scale of these operations suggests that large groups of workers were mobilized and directed by administrative authorities. Construction methods also reveal the emergence of architectural planning. Buildings in the Yana complex display consistent layouts, with rectangular halls, thick outer walls, and internal columns supporting roof structures. Some walls were decorated with cone mosaics, made from colored clay cones inserted into plaster surfaces. These decorative elements created geometric patterns that likely held symbolic significance. Their presence demonstrates that monumental buildings were not only functional but also intended to communicate institutional prestige. Most scholars interpret these structures primarily as temple complexes dedicated to religious activities. Temples in early Mesopotamian society served as centers of worship for local deities, but their functions extended beyond purely religious rituals. Archaeological evidence indicates that temple institutions played a central role in economic and administrative organization within early urban communities. Large storage facilities discovered within the Yana precinct contained evidence of agricultural surplus. Excavations uncovered substantial quantities of grain remains along with large ceramic containers used for storage. These findings suggest that agricultural products collected from surrounding farmland were stored and managed within temple compounds. The accumulation of surplus resources allowed administrators to redistribute food to workers, craftsmen, and other members of the community. Seal impressions discovered in storage areas provide further evidence of administrative control. Cylinder seals carved from stone were rolled across wet clay to create unique impressions that functioned as identifying marks. When containers or storage rooms were sealed with clay, these impressions indicated which official or institution was responsible for the contents. Numerous seal impressions discovered at Uruk show a wide variety of symbols and designs, suggesting the involvement of multiple administrative authorities. Clay tokens discovered in similar contexts also reveal the development of early accounting systems. These small clay objects were shaped into distinct forms representing quantities of goods, such as grain, livestock, or manufactured products. Tokens were sometimes enclosed inside clay envelopes known as bulli, which were sealed with administrative marks. Archaeologists interpret these objects as tools used to track the movement and distribution of resources within temple-managed economies. Such administrative tools demonstrate that temple institutions were deeply involved in managing economic activity. Agricultural land surrounding urban settlements was likely organized under institutional oversight, with farmers contributing portions of their harvest to central storage facilities. These resources could then be redistributed to support construction projects, religious festivals, and public labor initiatives. In this way, temple institutions acted as centers of economic coordination within the growing urban environment. The ability to organize large labor forces was another defining feature of these institutions. Monumental architecture required workers capable of producing bricks, transporting materials, and constructing massive walls and platforms. Coordinating such projects demanded leadership structures capable of directing labor over extended periods. Evidence suggests that temple authorities, possibly led by priestly administrators, fulfilled this role during the Uruk period. Public construction also served to reinforce institutional authority. Large temples visible from across the settlement symbolized the presence of organized leadership and communal religious identity. Their imposing scale likely contributed to the perception of divine protection and social order. Residents of the settlement would have participated in rituals and festivals conducted within these precincts, reinforcing shared cultural practices and loyalty to the institutions overseeing them. Another important function of temple complexes involved the coordination of irrigation and agricultural management. The fertile but unpredictable floodplains of southern Mesopotamia required constant maintenance of canals, levees, and drainage systems. Organizing this work demanded centralized planning and collective labor. Temple authorities, already responsible for managing agricultural surplus, were well positioned to coordinate these large-scale environmental projects. Archaeological surveys of canal systems surrounding early urban settlements support this interpretation. Many irrigation channels appear to have been expanded or modified during the Middle Uruk period. Maintaining these networks required not only technical knowledge but also the ability to mobilize workers from across the community. Institutional leadership, therefore, became essential for sustaining agricultural productivity in densely populated areas. Trade networks also intersected with these emerging institutions. Imported materials discovered within temple complexes suggest that administrators were involved in long-distance exchange. Items such as copper tools, stone vessels, and marine shells reached Mesopotamian settlements from distant regions. The presence of these goods within temple precincts indicates that institutions may have organized or supervised trade activities, ensuring access to resources not available locally. The centralization of economic activity within temple complexes also encouraged the development of more formal administrative practices. Large quantities of goods moving through storage facilities required reliable systems of identification and record-keeping. The use of clay tokens, seal impressions, and standardized containers reflects the gradual emergence of bureaucratic management within early cities. By the late 4th millennium BCE, these administrative techniques would contribute to one of the most significant technological developments in human history, the invention of writing. The earliest known clay tablets from Mesopotamia contain simple pictographic symbols representing commodities and numerical quantities. Many of these tablets were discovered within administrative contexts closely associated with temple institutions. The growth of monumental architecture, therefore, reflects more than architectural ambition. It reveals the emergence of organized institutions capable of coordinating economic production, managing surplus resources, directing labor, and maintaining social order. These institutions transformed proto-urban settlements into structured communities governed by increasingly formal systems of authority. Across southern Mesopotamia, similar developments began appearing in other expanding settlements. Although the scale of construction varied, many communities constructed public buildings that served religious and administrative functions. The spread of monumental architecture indicates that institutional governance was becoming a defining characteristic of early urban life. By approximately 3300 BCE, temple complexes had become central features of Mesopotamian cities. Their presence reflected a new stage in social organization, where economic activity, religious practice, and political authority were increasingly integrated within centralized institutions. As these institutions grew more complex, managing resources and labor required increasingly sophisticated administrative tools. The next stage of urban development would therefore involve the creation of more advanced record-keeping systems capable of organizing the expanding economies of the first cities. Managing the growing economies of early cities required a revolutionary new tool: permanent written records. By the late 4th millennium BCE, the administrative demands of expanding urban centers in southern Mesopotamia had reached a scale that traditional methods of memory and oral accounting could no longer sustain. Institutions responsible for managing agricultural production, labor obligations, and trade exchanges required reliable systems capable of recording transactions and verifying stored goods. In response to these pressures, administrators developed a set of accounting practices that would ultimately lead to the invention of writing. The earliest stage of this administrative system involved the use of small clay objects known as tokens. Archaeologists have discovered thousands of these artifacts across Mesopotamian sites dating from the late Neolithic through the Uruk period. Tokens were typically shaped into simple geometric forms such as spheres, cones, discs, and tetrahedrons. Each shape represented a specific commodity or quantity. For example, a cone-shaped token might represent a standard measure of grain, while other forms could represent livestock, containers of oil, or units of labor. These tokens functioned as physical counters used in economic transactions. When agricultural products were collected, distributed, or exchanged, administrators could assemble groups of tokens representing the relevant quantities of goods. The tokens therefore served as a tangible method for recording economic activity within the institutional economies of early Mesopotamian settlements. As administrative systems became more complex, tokens alone were no longer sufficient for secure record-keeping. To address this issue, administrators began sealing groups of tokens inside hollow clay containers known as bullae. A bulla was formed by wrapping wet clay around the tokens and allowing it to harden into a spherical envelope. Once sealed, the container preserved the tokens inside, preventing them from being altered without breaking the outer shell. Many of these bullae also contain impressions pressed into their exterior surfaces. Administrators often pressed the tokens themselves into the outer clay before sealing the envelope. This process created visible impressions representing the number and type of tokens enclosed within the container. As a result, officials could verify the recorded quantities without opening the sealed envelope. Numerous examples of such bullae have been uncovered during excavations at the ancient city of Uruk, along with similar discoveries at surrounding settlements across southern Mesopotamia. These administrative objects demonstrate the increasing complexity of economic management within early urban institutions. Agricultural surplus collected from surrounding farmland was stored in central facilities controlled by temples and administrative authorities. Goods entering or leaving these storage centers needed to be recorded accurately in order to maintain accountability. Bullae provided a reliable method for documenting transactions, especially when goods were transported between different officials or storage locations. Archaeological evidence suggests that bullae were widely used in administrative contexts during the late 4th millennium BCE. Excavations at several sites have uncovered bullae alongside large storage jars, granaries, and administrative buildings. Many examples also bear seal impressions made with carved cylinder seals. These seals produced distinctive patterns when rolled across wet clay, identifying the individual responsible for authorizing the transaction. Seal impressions therefore served as signatures verifying official approval. The development of these administrative tools reflects the institutional structure of emerging urban economies. As settlements grew larger, economic activities became increasingly centralized within temple complexes and administrative districts. Agricultural produce collected from farmers could be redistributed to laborers working on construction projects or irrigation systems. Similarly, trade goods arriving from distant regions needed to be cataloged and stored before distribution. Managing these flows of resources required systematic methods for recording transactions. Over time, administrators began to experiment with new techniques that simplified the accounting process. Rather than sealing tokens inside clay envelopes, officials started pressing symbolic impressions directly into flat clay surfaces. These impressions represented the same commodities previously indicated by tokens. Instead of placing a cone-shaped token inside a bulla, an administrator could simply press a stylus or token shape into a clay tablet to record the transaction. This innovation marked a crucial step toward the development of written record-keeping. The earliest known examples of such tablets date to approximately 3300 BCE and were discovered in the administrative districts of Uruk. These tablets typically contain rows of numerical impressions accompanied by pictographic symbols representing commodities. The symbols were often created using a stylus with a triangular tip, producing wedge-shaped marks in the clay. These early tablets represent the first stage of the writing system later known as cuneiform. At this early stage, the marks were primarily pictographic rather than phonetic. Each symbol represented a specific object or commodity rather than a spoken word. For example, simple drawings could represent barley, livestock, or containers of oil. Numerical signs placed beside these symbols indicated quantities. The administrative purpose of these tablets is clear from their archaeological context. Most examples have been discovered within storage buildings or administrative offices connected to temple complexes. Many tablets contain lists of goods, labor allocations, or records of deliveries. These documents functioned as official records tracking the movement of resources within the institutional economy of early Mesopotamian cities. Clay provided an ideal medium for these early administrative records. Wet clay tablets could easily be shaped by hand and marked using a stylus. Once the impressions were made, the tablet could be dried in the sun to preserve the record. In some cases, tablets were also baked in ovens, making them even more durable. Thousands of these tablets have survived in the archaeological record precisely because of this durability. Archaeologists working at Uruk uncovered some of the earliest examples of these administrative tablets during excavations conducted in the Yana district. The tablets are typically small and rectangular, often no larger than the palm of a hand. Their surfaces contain carefully arranged columns of symbols and numerical impressions. Although the writing system was still developing, the tablets demonstrate a clear effort to standardize administrative documentation. One significant feature of these early tablets is the use of numerical systems based on standardized units. Different symbols represented specific quantities, allowing administrators to record large numbers of goods efficiently. For example, separate numerical signs existed for counting individual items, measuring grain, or calculating labor rations. This system allowed officials to track economic activity with increasing precision. The emergence of written accounting provided several advantages over earlier token-based systems. Tablets could record more detailed information, including the names of commodities, quantities, and sometimes the institutions responsible for managing them. Unlike tokens sealed inside bully, tablets could also be stored and reviewed later without breaking a container. This made them more practical for long-term administrative record-keeping. The adoption of written records also reflects broader institutional changes within early urban societies. As economic systems expanded, administrative offices required permanent documentation to maintain control over complex resource flows. Writing allowed administrators to preserve information beyond the limits of human memory. Records could be consulted by multiple officials and used to verify previous transactions. This innovation also improved accountability within institutional hierarchies. Officials responsible for managing resources could now document their actions in written form. These records could later be reviewed by higher authorities or used to resolve disputes regarding the distribution of goods. Writing, therefore, contributed to the development of more formal bureaucratic structures within early Mesopotamian cities. The invention of written accounting did not occur suddenly but rather emerged gradually from earlier administrative practices. Tokens, bully, seal impressions, and numerical markings represent successive stages in the development of increasingly sophisticated record-keeping systems. Each innovation addressed practical challenges created by expanding urban economies. By the end of the 4th millennium BCE, writing had become an essential administrative tool in several major Mesopotamian settlements. Clay tablets recording economic transactions were now produced regularly within institutional offices. These records documented the movement of grain, livestock, labor rations, and manufactured goods across the urban economy. The emergence of written accounting systems therefore represents one of the most significant technological developments of the ancient world. Writing allowed early cities to manage complex economic systems, coordinate labor on large construction projects, and maintain centralized control over agricultural production. As administrators continued refining these techniques, the simple pictographic symbols used for economic records gradually evolved into a more versatile writing system capable of recording language itself. This transformation would soon expand the role of writing beyond accounting into law, literature, and governance across the civilizations of Mesopotamia. Around 3200 BCE, human societies developed the ability to permanently record information for the first time. In southern Mesopotamia, Administrators responsible for managing increasingly complex urban economies began using a new method of communication that would fundamentally transform governance and knowledge preservation. This innovation took the form of a writing system now known as cuneiform, characterized by wedge-shaped impressions pressed into clay tablets. Developed within the administrative environment of early Mesopotamian cities, this system allowed officials to document economic activity with far greater precision than earlier accounting tools. The earliest evidence for this writing system comes from archaeological excavations conducted at Uruk, one of the largest urban settlements of the late 4th millennium BCE. Excavations within the Yana precinct uncovered thousands of clay tablets dating to approximately 3200 to 3000 BCE. These tablets contain some of the earliest known written symbols in human history. Their contents consist largely of administrative records documenting the movement of agricultural products, livestock, labor allocations, and manufactured goods. The writing method itself relied on a simple but effective technology. Administrators used styluses made from cut reed stems, which were abundant in the marshlands of southern Mesopotamia. The stylus tip was typically shaped into a triangular wedge. When pressed into soft clay, it created a distinctive triangular impression. By arranging these impressions in various orientations, scribes produced a range of standardized symbols. Because the marks resembled small wedges, modern scholars refer to the script as cuneiform, derived from the Latin word cuneus, meaning wedge. At its earliest stage, cuneiform writing was primarily pictographic. Individual symbols were designed to represent physical objects or commodities rather than spoken sounds. For example, a simplified drawing could represent barley, livestock, or containers of oil. These pictographs were combined with numerical signs to indicate quantities. A typical administrative tablet might therefore contain a symbol representing grain followed by a series of numerical marks indicating how much grain was being recorded. Many of these tablets are organized into columns and rows, suggesting that scribes followed standardized formats when recording information. Some tablets list deliveries of grain from surrounding agricultural fields, while others record the distribution of rations to workers involved in construction or irrigation maintenance. These documents reflect the institutional structure of early Mesopotamian urban economies, where temples and administrative authorities managed large quantities of resources. Archaeologists have identified several distinct numerical systems used in early cuneiform tablets. Separate numerical signs were employed depending on the type of commodity being counted. For example, grain quantities were recorded using one set of numerical symbols, while livestock counts used another. This complexity indicates that scribes developed specialized methods for handling different categories of economic information. The earliest known tablets were produced during the late phase of the Uruk period. During this period, Uruk expanded into a large urban center with an estimated population of tens of thousands of inhabitants. The city contained monumental temples, administrative complexes, and large storage facilities where agricultural products were collected and redistributed. Managing this complex economic system required reliable documentation, which writing provided. As administrative practices continued to develop, the cuneiform writing system gradually evolved beyond simple pictographs. Over time, scribes began simplifying the original drawings into more abstract shapes composed entirely of wedge impressions. This transformation occurred because stylus impressions were easier to produce than detailed drawings. The new wedge-based symbols could be written more quickly while still preserving recognizable meanings. Another important development occurred when scribes began using symbols not only to represent objects but also to represent sounds. This phonetic usage allowed cuneiform to record elements of spoken language. By combining signs representing syllables with existing pictographs, scribes could express personal names, place names, and more complex administrative terms. This shift marked a major expansion in the capabilities of the writing system. Early scribal training likely played an important role in maintaining consistency across the writing system. Although few educational tablets from this early stage survive, later Mesopotamian sources describe formal scribal instruction involving the copying of standard sign lists. Students practiced writing individual symbols repeatedly in order to master the shapes and meanings of cuneiform signs. Such training would have been essential for administrators responsible for maintaining accurate economic records. Clay tablets used for writing were typically produced locally using the abundant clay deposits found throughout the Mesopotamian floodplains. A scribe would shape a small lump of wet clay into a rectangular or oval tablet, and then press symbols into its surface using the reed stylus. Once the text had been completed, the tablet could be left to dry in the sun. Some tablets were also baked in kilns, especially when they were intended to be preserved for long-term archival storage. Thousands of these tablets have survived in the archaeological record because of the durability of baked clay. Excavations at Uruk and other early Mesopotamian settlements have revealed entire archives of administrative documents. Many were discovered in rooms that appear to have functioned as storage areas or administrative offices. The concentration of tablets within these buildings indicates that early cities maintained centralized record-keeping systems. One important category of early tablets records the distribution of food rations. Workers employed in construction projects, agricultural labor, or craft production often received standardized allocations of grain, beer, or oil. Tablets documenting these distributions demonstrate how institutions organized labor within the urban economy. Such records allowed administrators to track the number of workers assigned to specific tasks and the resources required to support them. Other tablets record incoming agricultural deliveries from surrounding farmland. Farmers cultivating land associated with temple institutions likely provided portions of their harvest as contributions to centralized storage facilities. These goods were then redistributed to sustain the urban population, support temple activities, and fund construction projects. Written records ensured that these transactions could be documented and verified. The emergence of cuneiform writing therefore reflects broader structural changes within early Mesopotamian society. As cities grew larger, economic activities became increasingly centralized within institutional frameworks. Managing these complex systems required reliable communication methods capable of recording detailed information. Writing fulfilled this administrative need while also creating new possibilities for information storage and transmission. Although the earliest tablets focused primarily on economic matters, the writing system soon expanded into other areas of administration. Later tablets from the early 3rd millennium BCE include legal documents, diplomatic correspondence, and religious texts. These developments illustrate how a system originally designed for accounting gradually became a comprehensive medium for written communication. The influence of cuneiform writing extended far beyond the boundaries of southern Mesopotamia. Over the following centuries, the script was adopted by multiple cultures throughout the ancient Near East. Variations of cuneiform were used to record several different languages, including Sumerian, Akkadian, and others. The writing system remained in continuous use for more than 3,000 years, making it one of the longest-lasting writing traditions in human history. Archaeological discoveries continue to expand scholarly understanding of early cuneiform. Excavations across Mesopotamia have uncovered tens of thousands of tablets dating from different historical periods. Many of these documents provide valuable insights into the economic organization, social structure, and political institutions of early urban societies. Through these written records, historians are able to reconstruct the administrative systems that govern the first cities. The development of cuneiform writing therefore represents a decisive moment in the evolution of complex civilization. By enabling the permanent recording of information, writing allowed institutions to manage resources, coordinate labor, and preserve knowledge across generations. Administrative records could now be stored, reviewed, and transmitted, creating a foundation for more sophisticated forms of governance. With administrative systems now firmly established, the growing cities of southern Mesopotamia began developing increasingly formal political structures. Over time, these institutions would give rise to organized leadership systems that shaped the governance of the earliest urban civilizations. By the early 3rd millennium BCE, Mesopotamia was no longer a landscape of scattered villages but a network of competing city-states. Across the southern alluvial plains, settlements that had grown during the late 4th millennium gradually evolved into politically independent urban centers. Each city controlled surrounding agricultural land, irrigation networks, and local populations. Archaeological and textual evidence indicates that these communities had begun forming some of the earliest recognizable political systems in human history. Among the most prominent of these early cities were Ur, Lagash, Kish, and Uruk. Archaeological excavations at these sites reveal large urban populations supported by irrigation agriculture and organized labor systems. Each city developed its own administrative institutions, religious centers, and governing elites. Although they shared cultural traditions and religious beliefs, they functioned as separate political entities. The earliest stage of political authority in these cities appears to have been closely connected to temple institutions. During the preceding centuries, temples had served as centers for economic management and communal organization. They controlled agricultural land, supervised irrigation systems, and stored surplus grain. Temple administrators were therefore responsible for managing the resources that sustained urban populations. Many early administrative records discovered in temple complexes suggest that priestly officials exercised significant authority over economic activity. These officials supervised agricultural production, organized labor for canal maintenance, and distributed food rations to workers. Temples also controlled large storage facilities where harvested grain and other commodities were collected and redistributed. Because food supplies were essential to urban survival, the institutions managing these resources held considerable influence. The connection between religion and governance was reinforced by the belief that each city was under the protection of a specific deity. Temples dedicated to these patron gods or goddesses occupied central positions within the urban landscape. Religious ceremonies performed within these temples were believed to maintain the favor of the deity and ensure the prosperity of the city. As a result, temple authorities played an important role not only in economic management but also in maintaining social stability. However, by the beginning of the 3rd millennium BCE, evidence suggests that political leadership was gradually shifting beyond temple administration. Archaeological inscriptions and early written records indicate the emergence of secular rulers who exercised authority over broader aspects of urban governance. These leaders were responsible for coordinating large-scale construction projects, organizing defense forces, and managing relations with neighboring cities. One of the titles associated with these early leaders was ensi, a term commonly translated as governor. The title appears in inscriptions from several early Mesopotamian cities, and may have originally referred to a ruler who governed on behalf of a city's patron deity. The ensi likely held administrative authority over land management, irrigation systems, and public works. In some cities, the role may have developed from earlier temple leadership positions. Another important title appearing in early inscriptions is lugal, often translated as king. The word literally means great man in the Sumerian language. Unlike the ensi, who may have been closely tied to temple administration, the lugal appears to have exercised broader political authority. Some scholars suggest that this title originally emerged in contexts involving military leadership, particularly during periods of conflict between neighboring city-states. The emergence of kingship reflects the increasing complexity of political organization within Mesopotamian cities. As urban populations grew, the need for centralized leadership became more apparent. Irrigation systems required constant maintenance, agricultural production needed coordination, and city defenses had to be organized against potential rivals. Leaders capable of directing these activities gained significant influence within urban society. Archaeological evidence from city walls and defensive structures suggests that competition between neighboring cities was already becoming an important factor during the early 3rd millennium BCE. Many settlements constructed protective walls around their urban centers. These fortifications were built using large quantities of mud brick and required organized labor forces to construct and maintain them. The presence of such defensive structures indicates that city leaders were preparing for potential conflicts with rival polities. Political authority was also reinforced through large construction projects within the cities themselves. Rulers sponsored the building and renovation of temples, administrative buildings, and irrigation canals. Inscriptions found on foundation deposits often credit specific leaders with these projects. Such inscriptions served both administrative and symbolic purposes, linking the authority of the ruler with the prosperity of the city and the favor of its patron deity. These early rulers likely depended on cooperation with existing temple institutions. Although secular leadership was becoming more visible, religious authorities continued to hold considerable influence. Temples remained central to economic life, and rulers often worked closely with priestly administrators to manage resources and organize labor. The relationship between political leadership and religious institutions therefore remained deeply interconnected. Each city-state maintained control over surrounding agricultural territories that provided the food necessary to sustain urban populations. Farmers living in nearby villages cultivated grain fields irrigated by canals connected to the major rivers of southern Mesopotamia. These agricultural areas were integrated into the political structure of the city-state, with local production contributing to centralized storage and redistribution systems. The boundaries between neighboring city-states were often defined by irrigation networks and cultivated land rather than natural geographic barriers. As populations expanded and agricultural production intensified, competition for access to water and farmland became increasingly significant. These pressures would later contribute to conflicts between rival cities seeking to control valuable resources. Despite these rivalries, the city-states of southern Mesopotamia shared many cultural characteristics. They spoke related languages, used the same writing system, and worshipped a similar pantheon of deities. Administrative practices and economic systems were also broadly similar across the region. This shared cultural framework allowed ideas, technologies, and religious traditions to spread between cities, even as they competed for political influence. By approximately 2900 BCE, the region had entered a historical phase commonly known as the early dynastic period. During this era, city-states emerged as the dominant political structure across southern Mesopotamia. Each city functioned as an independent polity governed by its own leadership, institutions, and patron deity. The formation of these city-states represents a significant development in the history of human political organization. Unlike earlier village communities, these urban centers possessed defined territories, centralized leadership, and institutional governance systems. Their political structures laid the foundation for the more complex state systems that would later emerge throughout the ancient Near East. As political authority continued to evolve within these cities, religious institutions remained central to public life. Temples not only served as centers of worship, but also played a crucial role in shaping the cultural and administrative identity of each city-state. Kingship emerged as one of the defining institutions of Mesopotamian political life. During the early 3rd millennium BCE, the expanding populations and economic complexity of southern Mesopotamian cities required increasingly centralized systems of leadership. Administrative authority that had once been closely associated with temple institutions gradually shifted toward rulers who exercised broader political, military, and economic power. These leaders became central figures in the governance of the early city-states. This development occurred during the early dynastic period, when cities such as Lagash, Ur, and Kish functioned as independent political units. Each city maintained its own governing institutions, military forces, and ruling elites. The rise of kingship within these cities reflects the growing need for coordinated leadership capable of managing both internal administration and external relations with neighboring states. One of the primary titles associated with these rulers was Lugal, commonly translated as king. In the Sumerian language, the word literally means great man, a title suggesting elevated authority within the political hierarchy of the city-state. Early inscriptions indicate that the Lugal served as the principal decision-maker in matters of governance, warfare, and large-scale construction. The position likely developed gradually as urban societies required stronger leadership to coordinate increasingly complex institutions. Kings exercised authority across several critical areas of urban life. One of their primary responsibilities involved the supervision of irrigation systems that sustained agricultural production. The fertile but unpredictable floodplains of southern Mesopotamia required continuous maintenance of canals, levees, and water channels. These irrigation networks allowed farmers to cultivate crops across the otherwise arid landscape, but they also required coordinated labor and administrative oversight. Royal inscriptions from several cities describe rulers organizing large groups of workers to excavate new canals or repair existing waterways. Another important responsibility of early kings involved the construction and restoration of religious structures. Temples dedicated to city deities remained central to urban identity and economic activity. Although temple institutions had once been the primary administrative authorities, kings increasingly took responsibility for sponsoring temple building projects. Royal inscriptions frequently record rulers rebuilding temple complexes, installing statues of deities, or dedicating offerings within sacred precincts. Such actions reinforced the connection between political authority and divine favor. Written evidence for these activities appears in numerous inscriptions discovered at archaeological sites throughout southern Mesopotamia. One notable source of information is the inscriptions of Eannatum, a ruler of Lagash during the mid-3rd millennium BCE. Records from his reign describe military campaigns against neighboring city-states and construction projects undertaken within his city. Such inscriptions were often carved on stone monuments or foundation tablets placed beneath temple buildings. Military leadership was another essential component of kingship during this period. Competition between neighboring city-states frequently resulted in disputes over access to agricultural land, irrigation channels, and trade routes. Kings organized defensive forces and led military expeditions against rival cities when conflicts arose. Written records and relief carvings depict rulers commanding armies equipped with spears, shields, and early wheeled vehicles. These images suggest that warfare had become a regular feature of political life among Mesopotamian city-states. The authority of the king was also reinforced through the organization of large administrative systems. As urban economies expanded, managing resources required a network of specialized officials responsible for supervising different aspects of economic life. Administrative tablets discovered in palace archives reveal that royal households controlled extensive agricultural estates. These lands produced grain, livestock, and other resources that were redistributed through centralized storage facilities. Many administrative records also describe the operation of craft workshops associated with royal institutions. Artisans working within these workshops produced textiles, metal tools, pottery, and luxury goods. These products were used both for local consumption and for exchange with other regions. Palace administrators were responsible for managing the labor of these craftsmen and ensuring that materials were distributed efficiently. Evidence for the wealth and prestige of early ruling elites appears most clearly in archaeological discoveries from burial sites. One of the most significant examples is the set of elaborate tombs uncovered at Royal Cemetery of Uruk, dating to approximately 2600 BCE. Excavations conducted during the 20th century revealed a series of richly furnished graves believed to belong to members of the ruling elite. These tombs contained a wide range of valuable objects, including gold jewelry, finely crafted musical instruments, decorated weapons, and ceremonial vessels. Among the most famous discoveries is the burial associated with Pwabi, whose tomb contained numerous gold ornaments and elaborate headdresses. The scale and craftsmanship of these grave goods indicate the substantial resources controlled by elite households within Mesopotamian city-states. The presence of such wealth within royal burials also reflects the broader economic networks supporting these societies. Many of the materials discovered in the tombs originated from distant regions. Lapis lazuli, for example, was imported from mines in present-day Afghanistan, while carnelian and other precious stones came from areas of the Iranian Plateau and the Indus Valley. These materials reached Mesopotamian cities through long-distance trade routes connecting the region to other parts of the ancient Near East. Elite administration therefore extended beyond local agricultural management to include participation in regional exchange networks. Royal officials supervised the movement of goods entering and leaving the city, ensuring that valuable materials were recorded and redistributed through institutional channels. The existence of these trade networks contributed to the prosperity of many early Mesopotamian cities. Administrative tablets recovered from palace archives demonstrate how complex these bureaucratic systems had become. Records describe the collection of agricultural produce, the allocation of rations to workers, and the distribution of raw materials to craft workshops. Each transaction was carefully recorded using cuneiform writing, allowing officials to maintain oversight of economic activity across the city-state. The development of such administrative structures required trained scribes capable of producing and interpreting written records. These scribes served as essential intermediaries between rulers and the institutions they governed. By maintaining detailed documentation of economic transactions, they ensured that royal authorities could manage large populations and extensive resources effectively. By the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE, the political systems of southern Mesopotamian cities had therefore evolved into complex state structures combining royal authority, administrative bureaucracy, and religious institutions. Kings stood at the center of these systems, directing labor, organizing defense, and supervising economic activity across their territories. These political institutions did not exist in isolation from the religious traditions that shaped Mesopotamian society. Temples continued to influence urban life through ritual practices, economic management, and cultural identity. As political leadership became more centralized, rulers increasingly integrated their authority with the religious institutions that remained central to the social organization of the cities. For the inhabitants of Mesopotamian cities, the prosperity of the community depended on the favor of powerful deities. The natural world appeared unpredictable and often harsh. Floods could destroy fields, drought could threaten harvests, and warfare between cities could disrupt trade and agriculture. In this uncertain environment, religion provided a framework through which people understood the forces shaping their lives. The gods were believed to control fertility, weather, political stability, and the fate of individuals and entire cities. Maintaining a stable relationship with these divine powers therefore became one of the central responsibilities of urban society. Mesopotamian religion was not organized around a single universal deity, but instead revolved around a large and complex pantheon. Each god represented particular aspects of the natural world or human activity. Some deities governed cosmic forces such as the sky, the earth, or the sea, while others were associated with agriculture, warfare, wisdom, or fertility. Although the religious traditions of different cities shared many common beliefs, each urban center typically honored a specific patron deity believed to serve as the protector and guardian of that community. Among the most important deities in the Mesopotamian pantheon was Anu, the god of the sky. Anu was often regarded as the supreme authority among the gods and was associated with the highest level of the heavens. Although he rarely appeared directly in human affairs within mythological narratives, his position symbolized the overarching cosmic order that governed the universe. Closely connected with Anu was Enlil, the powerful god of wind and storms. Enlil was frequently portrayed as an active and decisive deity whose authority extended over both divine and human realms. In many traditions, he was believed to determine the destinies of cities and rulers. Another major figure within the pantheon was Enki, also known in later Akkadian tradition as Ea. Enki was associated with fresh water, wisdom, and craftsmanship. According to mythological texts, he possessed deep knowledge of creation and played a role in shaping human civilization. Rivers, irrigation canals, and the fertility of farmland were frequently linked to his influence, making him particularly important within agricultural societies dependent on controlled water systems. Within individual cities, however, religious life often centered on local patron gods whose identities were closely tied to the history and identity of the city itself. In the city of Uruk, the principal deity was Nana, the moon god. Nana was believed to regulate lunar cycles, which were essential for maintaining the calendar used to organize religious festivals, agricultural activities, and civic administration. The major temple dedicated to Nana stood at the heart of the city, symbolizing the intimate relationship between divine authority and urban life. In contrast, the city of Uruk honored the goddess Inanna as its patron deity. Inanna was one of the most complex and powerful figures within Mesopotamian mythology. She was associated simultaneously with love, fertility, political power, and warfare. Mythological narratives portray her as bold, ambitious, and often unpredictable. Her cult was particularly influential in southern Mesopotamia, and temples dedicated to her became major religious and economic institutions within the region. Another significant deity was Utu, the sun god, known in Akkadian tradition as Shamash. Utu was closely linked to justice and moral order. Because the sun illuminated the world each day, He was believed to observe human actions and ensure fairness within society. Legal traditions sometimes invoked his authority, emphasizing the belief that divine justice ultimately governed human law. The pantheon also included numerous other gods who played specialized roles within both mythological narratives and everyday religious practices. Agricultural communities prayed to deities associated with crop fertility and seasonal cycles. Craftsmen might offer prayers to divine patrons believed to protect specific professions. Merchants and travelers sometimes invoked gods connected with trade routes and distant lands. This diversity of divine figures reflected the wide range of activities that sustained urban economies. Religious knowledge was preserved and transmitted through a variety of textual traditions. Clay tablets containing hymns, prayers, and mythological stories have been discovered at archaeological sites throughout Mesopotamia. These texts reveal how priests and scholars interpreted the relationships between gods, nature, and human society. Some compositions described the creation of the world, while others explained the origins of specific rituals or festivals. Although many surviving myths were written down centuries after the earliest cities emerged, they preserve ideas that likely developed over long periods of oral tradition. Stories describing interactions among the gods helped explain natural phenomena, such as seasonal flooding or periods of drought. They also reinforced the belief that divine authority ultimately determined the success or failure of human communities. Ritual practices formed an essential part of maintaining relationships between humans and the divine. Priests were responsible for conducting ceremonies intended to honor the gods and secure their favor. These rituals could include offerings of food, drink, textiles, or livestock presented within temple precincts. Such offerings symbolized the idea that the gods required care and respect similar to that given to powerful rulers. Daily temple rituals often followed carefully regulated schedules. Statues representing the gods were treated as living embodiments of divine presence. Priests washed, clothed, and presented meals to these statues within the temple sanctuary. These practices reflected the belief that maintaining proper ritual order ensured harmony between the divine and human worlds. Large public festivals also played a major role in religious life. During these events, statues of the gods might be carried in ceremonial processions through city streets. Such festivals reinforced civic identity while emphasizing the protective relationship between the patron deity and the urban population. Participation in these rituals allowed ordinary inhabitants to express loyalty to both the gods and the political institutions that organized religious life. The influence of the pantheon extended beyond ritual practice into broader aspects of culture and governance. Kings frequently presented themselves as chosen representatives of particular deities. Royal inscriptions sometimes described rulers receiving divine approval for building projects, military campaigns, or legal reforms. This association between kingship and divine authority strengthened the legitimacy of political power. Religious beliefs also shaped how people interpreted events in the natural world. Floods, storms, or epidemics might be understood as signs of divine displeasure. Conversely, successful harvests or military victories could be interpreted as evidence of divine favor. These interpretations reinforce the importance of maintaining correct ritual practices and honoring the gods through offerings and temple construction. The organization of the pantheon also reflected broader cosmological ideas about the structure of the universe. Mesopotamian traditions often described a layered cosmos consisting of the heavens above, the earth in the middle, and an underworld beneath the surface. Different gods governed each of these realms, creating a structured system that mirrored the hierarchical organization of human society. Within this worldview, humans occupied a position of service to the gods. Mythological traditions sometimes described humanity as having been created to perform labor on behalf of the divine realm. Maintaining temples, cultivating fields dedicated to the gods, and conducting rituals were therefore seen as fulfilling humanity's essential purpose within the cosmic order. At the same time, the gods were not perceived as distant or abstract beings. They were believed to actively influence everyday events and respond to human actions. Through ritual offerings, prayers, and festivals, people sought to maintain a cooperative relationship with these powerful forces. The presence of multiple gods also allowed communities to interpret different aspects of life through specialized divine roles. Agricultural success might be linked to one deity, while military protection was associated with another. This flexible structure enabled religious beliefs to adapt to the varied needs of urban populations. Archaeological evidence supports the central importance of these beliefs within Mesopotamian cities. Temple complexes often occupied the most prominent locations within urban landscapes. Monumental structures such as ziggurats served not only as religious centers, but also as visible symbols of the relationship between the city and its patron deity. Over time, the pantheon continued to evolve as political and cultural changes reshaped the region. Conquests, migrations, and expanding trade networks introduced new religious influences. Some deities gained prominence while others merged with related figures from neighboring traditions. Despite these changes, the fundamental structure of the pantheon, multiple gods governing natural and social forces, remained a defining feature of Mesopotamian religion. Understanding the pantheon of Mesopotamian deities therefore provides important insight into how early urban societies interpreted the world around them. Religion shaped political authority, economic organization, and cultural identity. Through myths, rituals, and temple institutions, the inhabitants of Mesopotamian cities developed a comprehensive system for explaining both the opportunities and the uncertainties of life in the ancient world. Beyond their spiritual importance, however, temples also played a crucial role in managing resources and coordinating economic activity within the cities and Mesopotamian cities. Temples functioned not only as places of worship but also as powerful economic centers. While religious ceremonies and rituals were central to temple life, these institutions also controlled large agricultural estates, managed labor forces, and organized the production and distribution of essential resources. The integration of religious authority with economic administration made temples among the most influential institutions within early urban societies. The development of temple economies was closely tied to the agricultural environment of southern Mesopotamia. Cities depended heavily on irrigated farming along the river systems of the Tigris River and the Euphrates River. Because rainfall was limited and unpredictable, maintaining irrigation canals and regulating water flow was essential for sustaining crop production. Temple authorities played a major role in supervising these irrigation systems, ensuring that farmland received adequate water during the growing season. Large areas of agricultural land were formerly owned by temples dedicated to particular deities. These estates were cultivated by groups of laborers who worked under the supervision of temple administrators. The produce harvested from these lands supported not only religious activities but also broader urban populations. Grain, dates, vegetables, and other crops grown on temple estates were stored and redistributed according to administrative planning. Archaeological discoveries provide detailed evidence of how these agricultural systems operated. Excavations at the city of Lagash have revealed thousands of administrative clay tablets recording economic transactions. These tablets document grain harvests, livestock counts, labor assignments, and the movement of goods between storage facilities and distribution centers. The level of detail preserved in these records demonstrates that temple administrations developed sophisticated bureaucratic systems capable of managing large quantities of resources. Temple officials monitored agricultural production throughout the year. At the beginning of the planting season, workers prepared fields and maintained irrigation channels to ensure that water could reach cultivated areas. Teams of laborers were assigned to plant crops such as barley, which was one of the primary staples of the Mesopotamian diet. During the harvest season, additional labor forces gathered crops and transported them to storage facilities located within temple precincts. Surplus production played a critical role in sustaining urban populations. After harvests were completed, large quantities of grain were stored within temple granaries. These reserves allowed cities to maintain stable food supplies even during periods when agricultural production might decline due to environmental challenges. Grain stored in temple facilities could also be redistributed to workers and officials as part of organized labor systems. In many cases, agricultural workers did not receive wages in coinage but were instead compensated through rations distributed by temple administrators. These rations typically included grain, oil, and occasionally other goods such as textiles. Administrative tablets frequently record these distributions, listing the quantities of resources allocated to different groups of laborers according to their roles within the production system. Temple economies also supported specialized industries beyond agriculture. One of the most important of these was textile production. Wool from sheep raised on temple estates was processed in large workshops supervised by temple officials. These workshops employed substantial numbers of workers who were responsible for spinning wool into thread and weaving it into finished garments. Evidence from administrative archives suggests that textile workshops could employ hundreds of individuals. Many of these workers were women who participated in spinning and weaving tasks. The scale of production indicates that temple institutions organized textile manufacturing on a level comparable to large economic enterprises. Finished textiles were used both for local consumption and for exchange through regional trade networks. The organization of temple labor required careful coordination. Administrators assigned workers to specific tasks and monitored their productivity through written records. Clay tablets documented the allocation of raw materials, the completion of work quotas, and the distribution of finished goods. These records reflect the growing complexity of economic management within early city-states. Livestock management formed another important component of temple economies. Herds of sheep, goats, and cattle were maintained on lands associated with temple estates. These animals provided wool, milk, meat, and other resources essential to urban populations. Temple administrators tracked herd sizes and breeding cycles to ensure that livestock production remained sustainable. In addition to supporting the daily needs of the city, temple economies also contributed to broader regional exchange. Surplus agricultural goods and textiles could be traded with neighboring communities or distant regions lacking similar resources. These exchanges allowed cities to acquire materials that were scarce in the Mesopotamian environment, such as timber, metals, and stone. The integration of religious authority and economic administration helped reinforce the legitimacy of temple institutions. Because temples were dedicated to powerful deities, the resources they controlled were often regarded as belonging to the gods themselves. Workers who cultivated temple lands or produced goods within temple workshops were therefore seen as contributing to the maintenance of divine order. This perception strengthened social cooperation within urban communities. Agricultural labor, textile production, and other economic activities were framed not only as practical tasks but also as forms of religious service. By participating in temple economies, individuals contributed to the prosperity of both the city and its patron deity. The administrative systems developed within temple institutions also played a crucial role in the broader development of writing. Many of the earliest cuneiform tablets discovered by archaeologists consist of economic records documenting agricultural production, labor assignments, and resource distribution. These records illustrate how the need to manage complex economic systems encouraged the development of written documentation. Over time, temple bureaucracies expanded their responsibilities as urban populations continued to grow. Additional administrators were required to oversee storage facilities, coordinate labor groups, and maintain accurate records of economic activity. This increasing specialization reflects the broader evolution of institutional management within early civilizations. Although temples remained primarily religious institutions, their economic functions were essential for maintaining urban stability. By controlling agricultural production, organizing labor, and redistributing resources, temple administrations helped ensure that cities could support large and diverse populations. These institutional systems demonstrate the close relationship between religion and economic organization in early Mesopotamian society. The authority of the gods provided a powerful ideological foundation for managing resources and coordinating labor on a large scale. Temple economies therefore served not only as mechanisms of production but also as expressions of the religious worldview that shaped everyday life within the city. As agricultural production and institutional administration expanded, Mesopotamian cities became increasingly connected to regions beyond their immediate surroundings. Surplus goods produced within temple economies could be exchanged across long-distance trade routes, linking the cities of southern Mesopotamia with distant cultures and resources. By the 3rd millennium BCE, the rivers of Mesopotamia had become the primary arteries of urban commerce. The landscape surrounding the Tigris River and the Euphrates River formed natural transportation corridors that connected the major cities of southern Mesopotamia. Because overland travel across the alluvial plains was often slow and difficult, river transport became the most efficient method for moving goods, agricultural surplus, and construction materials between settlements. The geography of southern Mesopotamia made river navigation especially practical. The region consisted of broad floodplains created by centuries of sediment deposition from the two rivers. These waterways flowed from the mountains of Anatolia through the plains of modern Iraq before eventually reaching the Persian Gulf. Along their course, they passed near many of the major urban centers that developed during the 3rd millennium BCE. Cities such as Uruk, Uar, and Lagash were positioned strategically near these waterways or connected to them through canals. Their proximity to navigable channels allowed administrators, merchants, and laborers to transport large quantities of goods with relative efficiency. Barges traveling along the rivers could carry cargo that would have been far more difficult to move by land. Archaeological and textual evidence suggests that a variety of watercraft were used throughout Mesopotamia. Some boats were constructed primarily from bundles of reeds tied together and coated with bitumen to create waterproof surfaces. Reeds grew abundantly in the marshlands near the lower reaches of the rivers, making them an accessible material for boat construction. Bitumen, a naturally occurring form of asphalt found in parts of Mesopotamia, provided an effective sealant that protected vessels from water damage. Other boats were built from wooden planks that were fastened together and sealed with bitumen. Timber was relatively scarce in southern Mesopotamia, so wood was often imported from distant regions. As a result, reed boats likely remained more common for everyday transportation, while larger wooden vessels may have been reserved for heavier cargo or long-distance travel. River currents assisted movement downstream, allowing boats loaded with goods to travel efficiently toward major urban markets. Upstream travel required greater effort and was often accomplished through rowing, towing from the riverbanks, or using favorable winds when sails were available. Despite these challenges, the rivers remained the most practical transportation routes available. Administrative tablets discovered at urban sites provide important insights into how these transportation systems operated. Clay records from cities such as Uruk and Lagash document shipments of agricultural products, textiles, livestock, and other goods moving between locations. These records indicate that temple and palace administrations regularly organized the movement of supplies between rural estates and urban storage facilities. One of the most frequently transported commodities was barley. Barley served as a staple crop throughout Mesopotamia and was widely used for both food and beer production. Large quantities harvested from agricultural lands were transported by boat to urban centers, where they could be stored in granaries and redistributed to laborers, administrators, and craftsmen. Wool textiles represented another major category of goods transported along the rivers. Textile workshops operated under temple or palace supervision produced garments and cloth from wool obtained from domesticated sheep. These textiles could be moved along river routes to other cities where they were exchanged for additional goods or stored for future use. Livestock also formed part of the internal trade system. Sheep, goats, and cattle were sometimes transported by boat between agricultural estates and urban markets. Moving animals along waterways allowed administrators to relocate herds more efficiently than through long overland drives across the plains. The extensive canal networks constructed throughout southern Mesopotamia further enhanced these transportation systems. Irrigation canals originally built to supply water to farmland also functioned as navigable channels connecting rural areas with major cities. These canals allowed boats to travel directly between agricultural fields and urban storage centers. Maintaining these canals required constant labor. Sediment carried by the rivers could accumulate within channels and obstruct navigation. As a result, city administrations organized regular canal maintenance projects involving large numbers of workers. Clearing silt and repairing canal walls ensured that water could continue flowing both for irrigation and for transportation. Because canal systems connected numerous settlements, they also helped integrate the economies of different regions. Goods produced in rural farming communities could be transported to urban markets where they were exchanged or redistributed. In turn, cities supplied rural populations with manufactured goods such as pottery, tools, and textiles. The presence of reliable transportation networks contributed significantly to the growth of urban populations. Cities depended on steady inflows of food and materials from surrounding agricultural territories. Without efficient transportation systems, it would have been difficult to sustain large concentrations of people in densely populated urban environments. River transport also facilitated administrative control over regional economies. Temple and palace authorities could move resources between different locations to respond to shortages or seasonal changes in production. Grain collected as taxation or tribute from rural communities could be shipped to central storage facilities where it could be managed more effectively. Merchants likewise benefited from these transportation systems. Although temple and palace institutions dominated much of the early economy, private traders also participated in the movement of goods between settlements. Boats traveling along the rivers allowed merchants to carry products from one city to another, contributing to the circulation of commodities across the region. The development of these internal trade systems helped create an increasingly interconnected network of urban centers throughout southern Mesopotamia. Cities were no longer isolated settlements dependent solely on their immediate surroundings. Instead, they formed part of a broader economic landscape linked together by waterways and canals. These logistical systems played a crucial role in the stability and growth of early urban civilization. By enabling the efficient movement of agricultural surplus and manufactured goods, river transport allowed cities to expand their populations and sustain complex economic activities. While these river routes connected Mesopotamian cities internally, the region faced significant limitations in natural resources. Southern Mesopotamia lacked many materials necessary for construction and tool production, including metals, stone, and timber. As urban economies continued to expand, the need for these resources encouraged the development of long-distance trade networks that extended far beyond the river valleys to sustain their growing economies. Mesopotamian cities reached far beyond the river valleys in search of vital resources. Southern Mesopotamia possessed fertile soil and abundant water for agriculture, but it lacked essential raw materials needed for construction, metalworking, and luxury production. Timber for building, stone for tools and monuments, and metal ores for weapons and craft items were scarce. The shortage of these resources drove Mesopotamian urban centers to establish trade connections with distant regions, creating some of the earliest long-distance exchange networks in human history. Archaeological and textual evidence indicates that Mesopotamian merchants maintained extensive commercial links with neighboring regions across the Near East. Copper, essential for toolmaking and early bronze production, was imported from Oman and the surrounding Arabian Peninsula. Precious stones, including lapis lazuli, were transported from mines in the Badakhshan. Other materials such as silver, tin, and various types of timber also reached southern Mesopotamian cities through long-distance caravans and maritime routes. Administrative clay tablets from cities like Uruk and Lagash record commercial transactions involving foreign merchants and caravans. These documents include detailed accounts of goods received, quantities traded, and the individuals responsible for transporting items. They reveal a sophisticated system of resource management that integrated international trade with local economic administration. Temple and palace officials often oversaw these exchanges, ensuring that imported materials were directed to specific workshops, construction projects, or storage facilities. Wool textiles, grain, and finished goods produced in Mesopotamian cities served as primary trade commodities. Textiles, in particular, were highly valued for their quality and were exchanged for raw materials not locally available. Grain and other agricultural surpluses could be offered as tribute or payment to trading partners. This reciprocal exchange system allowed Mesopotamian cities to acquire the necessary resources to maintain construction, craft industries, and military capabilities. Trade routes extended over land and water. River transport facilitated movement within Mesopotamia, while overland caravans carried goods across the Iranian plateau and Anatolian highlands. Maritime routes in the Persian Gulf connected Mesopotamia with the Arabian Peninsula, enabling the import of copper, bitumen, and other resources. Archaeological evidence of harbors, boat remains, and dock structures supports the existence of maritime trade as a complement to overland exchanges. These networks were not only economic but also cultural. Contact with distant regions introduced new technologies, materials, and artistic styles into Mesopotamian society. For example, the introduction of bronze metallurgy required access to tin and copper, and its adoption influenced the production of tools, weapons, and ceremonial objects. Imported stones were often carved into seals, jewelry, or ritual artifacts, demonstrating the transmission of artistic techniques across regions. The scale and complexity of long-distance trade required specialized administrative oversight. Temple and palace bureaucracies coordinated shipments, maintained inventories, and recorded transactions in cuneiform tablets. Scribes monitored incoming and outgoing goods, ensuring accurate accounting and preventing mismanagement. This system of documentation reflects the interdependence of commerce, governance, and literacy in early urban economies. Trade also had geopolitical implications. Access to essential resources could determine the relative power of city-states. Cities controlling key trade routes or with privileged access to imported materials could strengthen their political and economic positions relative to rivals. Conversely, disruptions in trade, whether due to environmental factors, conflict, or logistical challenges, could threaten urban stability. The integration of long-distance trade into Mesopotamian economic life illustrates how early civilizations were interconnected across large geographic areas. Cities were not isolated entities but components of a broader network of exchange linking disparate regions of the Near East. The movement of goods facilitated the flow of knowledge, technologies, and cultural practices, creating a shared framework of interaction among early societies. By the end of the 3rd millennium BCE, these trade networks had become essential to the functioning of Mesopotamian urban centers. Imported resources sustained construction projects, craft industries, and military production, while the circulation of local products reinforced the economic vitality of cities. The interregional connections established during this period laid the foundation for more extensive trade networks in later periods, ensuring that Mesopotamian cities remained integrated into a dynamic and interconnected ancient world. As long-distance commerce expanded, it stimulated the development of specialized industries within the cities themselves, creating economic diversity and supporting the growth of complex urban populations in the crowded river plains of southern Mesopotamia. Control of water meant control of survival. The alluvial landscape provided fertile soil, but its productivity depended almost entirely on managed irrigation. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers, together with a complex network of canals, ditches, and reservoirs, supplied water to fields across the region. Because agricultural output was essential for feeding urban populations, maintaining social stability, and supporting temple and palace economies, access to these water systems became a central factor in political power. Control over irrigation channels was therefore a strategic priority for city-states throughout the early dynastic period. Archaeological and textual evidence indicates that territorial disputes often arose along these irrigation networks. Clay tablets and inscriptions from cities such as Lagash and Umma document boundary agreements, land allocations, and conflicts over water rights. Some texts describe long-standing disagreements over canal maintenance, while others record outright military confrontations sparked by disputes over fertile fields. These records illustrate how essential water management was to the survival and prosperity of each city-state. Agricultural control extended beyond the land itself to include the labor and resources necessary for productive farming. Temples and palaces relied on organized workforces to construct and maintain canals, plant and harvest crops, and manage storage facilities. Cities that controlled larger or better-maintained irrigation networks could produce surplus grain more reliably, supporting larger populations and strengthening political authority. Consequently, securing these territories became a high-priority objective in both diplomacy and armed conflict. Fortifications provide further evidence for the prevalence of intercity competition. Excavations at early dynastic sites such as Uruk, Lagash, and reveal substantial defensive walls constructed from mud brick. These structures were often accompanied by watchtowers, gates, and bastions, indicating that cities anticipated potential attacks from neighboring polities. The placement of fortifications near key canals and agricultural areas underscores the relationship between irrigation control and urban security. Weaponry and other military artifacts further demonstrate the organization of armed forces in Mesopotamian city-states. Sumerian armies typically included infantry equipped with spears, shields, and bows. Some evidence suggests the early use of chariots or wagon-based transport for troops and supplies. Inscriptions describe rulers mobilizing forces to defend their cities or assert claims over contested land, illustrating that military capability was closely intertwined with political and economic objectives. Irrigation disputes often triggered cycles of aggression and retaliation. For example, textual records from the Lagashama conflict in the mid-3rd millennium BCE detail repeated skirmishes over boundary markers and canal access. These conflicts were not merely local disputes but involved coordinated mobilization of labor and resources, reflecting the broader organizational capacity of city-states. The need to protect or expand irrigated farmland thus influenced both administrative structures and military planning. Control over irrigation also had a direct impact on regional alliances. Cities with well-maintained water networks could offer surplus grain or shared canal access to allies, strengthening political bonds and mutual defense arrangements. Conversely, rival cities might attempt to disrupt an opponent's water supply through sabotage, diversion, or armed intervention. Such strategies illustrate how natural resources shaped the geopolitical logic of Mesopotamian societies. These pressures gradually encouraged the development of more formal military institutions. As conflicts over water and agricultural territory became recurrent, city-states invested in standing forces, fortified positions, and logistical systems to support extended campaigns. The integration of military, administrative, and agricultural planning reflects the interconnected nature of Mesopotamian political life. By the end of the early dynastic period, territorial competition and irrigation control had become defining features of the political landscape. City-states were constantly negotiating the balance between cooperation and conflict, with water management at the core of both strategies. These dynamics not only shaped patterns of warfare but also influenced broader economic and administrative development. As disputes over farmland and canals intensified, Mesopotamian city-states began formalizing military leadership and organization, setting the stage for the emergence of professional armies and more centralized authority within the urban centers. The growing wealth of Mesopotamian cities required organized armies capable of defending and expanding their territories. As urban centers accumulated surplus resources, controlled irrigation networks, and specialized labor, they became targets for rival city-states. To safeguard these assets and assert political influence, rulers increasingly invested in structured military forces. These early armies represented one of the first institutionalized forms of organized warfare in human history. Infantry formed the backbone of these forces. Soldiers were typically armed with spears, daggers, and shields crafted from wood, leather, or metal. Helmets, often made from bronze or leather, provided basic protection during combat. Relief carvings, cylinder seals, and artistic depictions from sites such as Lagash and Uruk suggest that infantry fought in coordinated formations. While the exact tactics remain uncertain, some scholars propose that these arrangements anticipated later phalanx-like deployments, emphasizing unity, discipline, and mutual defense among ranks. Elite units often enjoyed additional mobility and protection. Chariots, drawn by onagers or donkeys, were introduced during the early dynastic period. These vehicles carried elite warriors or officers, providing both speed and a tactical advantage on the battlefield. Although chariots were relatively scarce and expensive, they played a critical role in reconnaissance, flanking maneuvers, and rapid strikes against enemy formations. Administrative tablets reveal that maintaining these armies required extensive logistical planning. Soldiers were supplied with food rations, weapons, and uniforms, often sourced from temple or palace estates. Grain, oil, and other essentials were distributed to troops on a regular basis, ensuring sustained operational capacity during campaigns. These records demonstrate that military provisioning was closely integrated into broader urban administration, highlighting the interdependence of economic and military structures. Leadership within early armies was typically exercised by the city's ruler, known as a lugul, or by appointed military commanders acting on the ruler's authority. Royal inscriptions from Lagash and Uruk describe kings personally leading troops into battle, coordinating strategies, and adjudicating spoils of war. This direct involvement reinforced the ruler's political legitimacy, linking military success to urban authority. Military organization also extended to the training and discipline of soldiers. While many infantry units were drawn from the city's male population, evidence suggests that some forces were maintained as semi-professional contingents capable of rapid mobilization. Drills, standardized weaponry, and hierarchical command structures allowed armies to operate with cohesion, even in complex campaigns spanning multiple city-states. The development of early Mesopotamian military structures was closely tied to the region's political and economic environment. Competition for fertile land, control of irrigation canals, and the protection of trade routes all required coordinated armed forces. Consequently, the state assumed responsibility for organizing, equipping, and deploying armies, integrating warfare into the broader framework of urban governance. Archaeological evidence also reflects the material culture of warfare. Excavations at fortified sites have uncovered projectile points, spears, slingshots, and defensive walls. Monumental art, including reliefs from Lagash, depicts battles with infantry and chariot units, emphasizing discipline, coordination, and the central role of the ruler. These visual records provide critical insights into the composition and deployment of early armies. Warfare was not solely defensive. Early Mesopotamian armies conducted raids, border skirmishes, and expansionist campaigns to assert influence over neighboring settlements. Control of agricultural land, water rights, and trade routes often motivated these operations, demonstrating how military activity was closely linked to economic and political objectives. The integration of military functions into city administration reflects the institutional evolution of early Mesopotamian states. Armies were funded, provisioned, and commanded through centralized bureaucracies, illustrating how warfare became an essential component of state responsibility. These developments enabled city-states to defend territories, maintain internal stability, and engage in strategic offensives, shaping the geopolitical landscape of the region. Several conflicts between rival cities have been preserved in inscriptions and monumental art, providing detailed accounts of campaigns, troop movements, and outcomes. These records highlight the strategic importance of well-organized armies in securing political power and sustaining urban economies. As city-states continued to compete for resources and influence, the institutionalization of military organization set the stage for the emergence of larger territorial powers and more complex forms of political authority in Mesopotamia by the late 3rd millennium BCE. A single ruler began unifying the fragmented cities of Mesopotamia. Around 2334 BCE, Sargon of Akkad emerged from relatively modest origins to reshape the political landscape of the region. According to inscriptions written by later Akkadian rulers, Sargon initially served as a cupbearer or royal official in the city of Kish before leveraging military and political opportunities to seize control. Once in power, he established a new political center at the city of Akkad, which would become the administrative heart of his growing empire. Sargon conducted a series of military campaigns that systematically subdued the major Sumerian city-states. Uruk, Lagash, and other urban centers were brought under his authority, often through coordinated attacks that combined infantry, chariot units, and siege strategies. Inscriptions from later periods describe the capture of city walls, the relocation of defeated populations, and the imposition of tribute systems to integrate conquered territories into the Akkadian state. These campaigns enabled the first known large-scale territorial unification in Mesopotamian history. Administrative innovations accompanied Sargon's military successes. Governors, known as ensi, were appointed to oversee the affairs of subordinate cities. These officials were responsible for collecting tribute, supervising local labor forces, and maintaining loyalty to the central authority in Akkad. Temple and palace economies were integrated into a broader imperial taxation system, allowing resources such as grain, livestock, and textiles to be redirected across the empire. This centralization enhanced the efficiency of economic management and ensured that surplus production could support both urban populations and military campaigns. Archaeological and textual evidence reflects the scope of Akkadian administration. Clay tablets from cities under Sargon's control indicate standardized accounting practices, record-keeping, and correspondence with the imperial center. These documents demonstrate that the empire's governance relied on well-organized bureaucratic systems capable of coordinating resources across hundreds of kilometers of territory. Standardization of weights, measures, and administrative procedures further reinforced imperial cohesion. Sargon's consolidation of power also involved controlling communication and transportation networks. Major rivers, including the Tigris River and Euphrates River, along with existing canal systems, facilitated the movement of goods, military forces, and administrative personnel. These logistical capabilities enabled the empire to respond to local disturbances, redistribute resources efficiently, and maintain centralized authority over diverse regions. The rise of Sargon represents a major transformation from a landscape of autonomous city-states to a territorially unified empire. Political authority was no longer confined to single urban centers but extended across multiple regions under centralized rule. This shift established the template for subsequent empires in Mesopotamia and set a precedent for the integration of military, administrative, and economic systems within a single imperial framework. Sargon's reign also influenced cultural and ideological developments. Royal inscriptions emphasized divine sanction, portraying the king as chosen by the gods to unify the lands of Sumer and Akkad. This ideological framework reinforced political authority and legitimized the centralization of power. Temples continued to operate as religious centers, but their economic and administrative functions were increasingly coordinated under imperial oversight. By the end of Sargon's reign, the Akkadian Empire controlled most of southern and central Mesopotamia, establishing a network of cities and territories connected by both political allegiance and economic interdependence. The integration of previously independent city-states into a single imperial system demonstrates how military conquest, administrative innovation, and centralized governance combined to produce the first territorial empire in Mesopotamian history. Sargon's successors inherited this political structure and continued expanding and consolidating the empire, ensuring that the innovations in administration, military organization, and economic integration would shape Mesopotamian governance for generations to come. The innovations of the first cities continued shaping Mesopotamian civilization for thousands of years. Administrative structures, writing systems, and urban planning practices established in the early city-states provided the institutional foundations for subsequent societies across the region. Clay tablets and cuneiform inscriptions preserved methods of resource management, legal frameworks, and bureaucratic procedures, which were later adapted by the Babylonian and Assyrian civilizations. Temples and palaces continued to function as central nodes of economic, religious, and political authority, reflecting patterns first established in Uruk, Uar, and Lagash. Writing, initially developed for accounting and record-keeping, evolved into a versatile tool for literature, law, diplomacy, and scientific documentation. The standardization of cuneiform symbols, administrative conventions, and archive management influenced later scribal traditions throughout Mesopotamia. Cities such as Babylon and Nineveh expanded upon these methods, producing extensive archives of legal codes, economic transactions, and historical annals. The early system of governors and centralized administration in the city-states provided a blueprint for managing multi-regional empires, demonstrating the utility of hierarchical authority combined with bureaucratic oversight. Urban planning principles also had a lasting impact. Streets, residential quarters, temple precincts, and public spaces were arranged according to organizational patterns that emphasized administrative efficiency and communal functionality. These layouts influenced the construction of larger cities under subsequent empires, ensuring that urban centers could accommodate growing populations while maintaining centralized economic and political control. Water management and canal networks, first developed to support intensive irrigation in early settlements, became integral to sustaining agricultural surplus in later Mesopotamian states. Religious institutions retained their central societal role, blending spiritual authority with economic administration. Temples continued to oversee agricultural estates, craft production, and resource redistribution, while priestly and royal officials coordinated urban governance. The fusion of religious, political, and economic power established in the first cities persisted as a defining feature of Mesopotamian civilization, contributing to social stability and institutional continuity. Trade networks, both internal and long-distance, also demonstrated continuity and expansion. Early city-states pioneered the movement of goods, from grain and textiles to metals and precious stones, across the Near East. Later empires built upon these networks, facilitating larger-scale commerce, cultural exchange, and technological diffusion across multiple regions. The integration of trade into urban and imperial administration reinforced economic cohesion and sustained centralized authority. Military organization and territorial defense strategies established by city-states provided foundational models for later empires. Professional armies, fortified urban centers, and logistical planning were refined and expanded in successive political entities, enabling them to maintain control over broader territories. The early combination of military, administrative, and economic coordination demonstrated in the first cities became a recurrent pattern in Mesopotamian statecraft. Through these institutional, technological, and administrative legacies, the first cities of Mesopotamia established enduring frameworks for governance, economy, and society. Their innovations informed subsequent urban development, bureaucratic practice, and imperial administration, ensuring that the patterns created during the formative urban period continued to shape the trajectory of Mesopotamian civilization for centuries. These early developments would ultimately influence urban societies far beyond Mesopotamia, laying the groundwork for later complex civilizations in the Near East and establishing a model of urban life that resonated across the ancient world. Before you go, make sure to hit the subscribe button, click the bell icon to get your daily dose of Nightfall history, and comment below with the part of Mesopotamian history that fascinated you the most today. Your engagement helps us bring more in-depth historical documentaries straight to your screen.